Hello, 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 everybody, from my good friend JP at Apex Counseling, and of course, myself from Viking Performance Training. The Asymmetric Habits brothers here. If you're catching this live, good morning to you. If you're catching this on when it's recorded and published on the Asymmetric Habits podcast, then I hope you're having a great commute or lunch break, whatever it is you're doing. So today's topic is on big injuries. So this is kind of more in my field, technically, with as a strength and conditioning coach and personal trainer, helping a lot of people deal with injuries. But it's something that JP deals with a lot as well, with the mental health aspect, people going through it, and just where you can possibly help them get to the other side and get back to a good quality of life, depending on how big the injury is. So, like the caption says, I mean, injuries are something we all go through. It's a big reason of why we wanted to have this as a topic today. And whether you're super athletic or just super like active, that's where a lot of people think of big injuries happening. But you find out all too quickly that whether through yourself or just people you know and love, that big injuries can happen literally anyway. You know, it could be a car wreck, leaving some unfortunate injuries, or something as simple as picking up laundry or even sleeping. I mean, that is it sounds like a joke, but that's always a real thing. And we might get into that. Or like my personal worst injury, that's actually where I got it, was sleeping poorly. Um, yeah. So JP, what do you think, man?
Man, one of the sad things about injuries is how badly people deal with them, not because they intentionally deal with them badly, but because we have such weird holes in our education, when
Mhm.
we teach kids. And one of the weird things we never teach kids particularly well is how to deal with injuries. And so then, as like teenagers or late teenagers or as adults, then we've got to figure these things out for ourselves. And if I kind of capture half a dozen problems with the way we learn about injuries. Of course, we've got the walk it off culture.
Oh yeah,
There's,
big time.
yeah, the belief of like, you're just supposed to keep pushing, keep going, unless your the bone is literally sticking through your skin. A lot of times, parents or coaches or ourselves will imagine we should keep pushing. So you've got the overarching culture that you've got to fight against. Human beings, of course, are adaptable, which creates a problem because if we have anything that starts off small and nagging and starts to increase, because we're so adaptable, as long as it ramps up slow, we can tolerate completely insane levels of misery as long as it doesn't come on too fast. So, a bone break that happens all at once, but little micro tears and injury accumulations that occur over time, people can live in crazy amounts of pain without working on it as long as it comes up slow. So you got those things. You've got once an injury happens, we've never taught people how to properly think through and work through things, especially if their sport or their activity or their work is part of their identity. There's just all these things stack up to really put a lot of barriers in people's ways, especially the first time they have to work through an injury, but even really the subsequent times as well.
Absolutely. I think so. One thing with the walk it off culture definitely like made a lot of sense. Because you see that so often, especially in it's funny because you really have two ends. You have a lot of the walk it off culture, especially in sports or activities. Um, and then you do have, some people who tend to worry about everything. But you find out that that doesn't have as much. There's no damage there, so it's like
No, that's if I was going to actually pick between the two, I would pick the second one as the
right,
problem to have.
exactly. And so one of the key things I think is like, yeah, like if you suspect an injury, especially a bigger one, or the possibility is, I mean, your number one thing is find out as soon as you can, because so many injuries, um, speed matters.
Hold up before you do that point. I just realized that there's something, since this is such a barrier, we should make mention of, because it's your point will be far more useful
Yeah.
if we say this first. Uh, really, there's because of the culture, there's a part of this that I've ended up telling clients quite a lot, which is kind of my selling. Like I have to exercise a little salesmanship of why is it important to take care of injuries just because of how badly we're taught. And one of the things I would point out to everyone, since I have the wide audience today instead of just one or two people, uh, you live in your body 24 hours a day.
Mhm.
Most people treat their bodies with less care than they would their car or their house. You're in your house maximum 16-ish hours a day, unless you work from home. You're in your car maximum a couple hours a day, but so many people prioritize their body last. And not only just in terms of pain and discomfort living in that, as far as expense, if you let small things go and let them become big things, I mean, it's kind of like the water leak in your house. If you let that go for a month, that can be a 900 or $1,000 repair. If you let it go for 20 years, you could be spending 50 grand rebuilding half the house. One of the
Mhm.
things I encourage people to think about as I then, kind of preach the gospel of please take care of your damn injuries is if you let this go, this becomes more psychologically and monetarily expensive over time. So I'm sorry to have interrupted you, but I realized that's really
No,
important to kind of say up
you're
front.
good. And it is an odd part of human thinking that that's so true that so many of us do prioritize our bodies so little, and listen to it. It's funny because I mean, to go with that and with the topic, most people, especially adults, like, have some amount of pain that they or discomfort that they feel is normal. It's just like, oh, my low back is always tight or something, or just like this old injury, like my knee always aches. Not realizing, or we just, I think we realize it, but just like almost ignore it. The idea that we're actually not supposed to feel injured all the time. We're not supposed to
The
be in chronic.
normal amount of pain is zero.
Right. Which goes back to where I was going with when you suspect an injury and like a new one or something has happened or just something not going away, is definitely go get it checked out or go find at least an answer to it. And because again, knowing what it is is a big step. And to go with that, with physical injuries and physical healing, time can matter depending on what the injury actually is. A lot of our injuries are time sensitive when it comes to our ability to recover. And that was one big part that I wanted to make sure we got to in this broadcast. Is there are a lot of things like for example, knee surgeries or shoulder surgeries, a lot of these injuries, if they're not taken care of within like X amount of time after they first occur, the chances of them coming back to 100% function and pain free starts dropping pretty dramatically. So if you take care of it too late, then again, you might get it back or might get it functional again, but it will probably, the chances of it becoming that bum shoulder or bum knee increase dramatically if you don't take care of it earlier. And I said, like you can follow the same protocols to try to get it back healthy again, but just that's how important the speed of it is. So you want to make sure you actually are addressing things and, like you said, not kicking the can down the road, not only for your own quality of life, but because it may actually change the ability to heal and recover at the end
Well,
result.
and if we're going to talk about the time dimension, we certainly can't ignore because you're saying if you leave it too long, it may never recover all the way. There's also leaving it and allowing other injuries to accumulate around it.
Yes.
So a minor tear in, say, a tendon can become a severing, or same thing for a ligament, or even if it doesn't accumulate in that way, let's take a foot injury because certainly it can happen most easily with foot and ankle injuries. If you injure something and you start limping and you start walking in a manner that's unnatural, the likelihood of creating a new injury because of that new movement pattern jumps up dramatically. So, okay, I have a foot and ankle injury, and now I start walking weird, and now one of my knees starts to accumulate
Mhm.
injury, or one of my hips. And if I start favoring that, like I can start climbing up the chain fairly rapidly over a course of a year or two. Uh, so that's another reason to really not waste a lot of time, because if you develop an unnatural movement pattern, uh, and of course, I'm mostly repeating everything my physical therapist has told me. This is not my actual area of expertise, but we should have had him on to describe that. But unnatural movement patterns from an injury will create new injuries. So you basically just have
Absolutely.
this spread effect.
Absolutely. And this is really where having a professional, like working with a physical therapist, first of all, if it needs to go that far, working with a surgeon. Like I said, step one is figure out what is actually going on. And the official answer would be go get a doctor looking at it. There are some things that, like, non-medical licensed professionals can probably tell you with pretty good certainty what it likely is. So someone who really knows the human body. Um, but then if it is something that needs treated, go get the appropriate treatment, whether that is physical therapy, whether you need surgery and then need to go to physical therapy. And then one big issue that I see a lot, and I used to see this a lot when I was working at the university level, and kind of goes to what you're saying about improper movement patterns, is there is a tendency, and our system is built this way, to get something just good enough. For example, go to your PT sessions until your your insurance will say, "Oh, we feel like you get 12 sessions for this," something like that, or you'll be good in 24 sessions. There's a tendency, the system's built that way, and there's also a tendency in people to go to those minimal number of sessions and then finish them and be like, "Oh, well, rehab is done. I'm done. Back to normal." Whereas most big injuries, they take a pretty substantial amount of time to truly get back to the where healthy should be. Something like
Mhm.
PT or just your own strengthening protocol got it back to a certain level, but just because you're at a standard functional level from the eyes of rehab or post surgery doesn't mean you're at the level that actually matches your body that you want to be at yet, and you need to keep getting it better.
Well, yeah, I joke with my clients a little bit because I tell them, because a lot
Mm.
of times I assign people to do things outside of the counseling room, and I joke with them that the counseling homework never actually ends. Even when you stop seeing me, you still have to do
Mhm.
the things. And in a way, physical therapy and injury prevention and injury healing things are kind of like that. Even though I don't see my PT more than once every few months, my homework has never ended. I still have to do the exercises to some degree to make sure everything stays loose and oiled, and the injury doesn't start to reoccur. But you're absolutely right. That's not well explained to many people because we have the mindset of medical necessity, so we patch you together just enough to make you able to walk again, but there are certain providers who don't do a good job of explaining, like, okay, now I once you discharge, this is your last session, but now I need you to do this going forward, and really explaining the importance of that, because some of them will absolutely just cut you loose and be like, all right, well, physical therapy's done, nice seeing you, bye-bye. And
Exactly.
sadly, that's not really a good way of going about things. Really, it needs deeply explained. Please continue doing this on at least some sort of basis for a long time, if not forever.
Yep. Yeah, like we're so accustomed to the idea of what the medical establishment says is okay as being what we need, what we want being good. And the thing is, we don't look at it. We're not very good at looking at that with the true perspective. Um, like when you get cleared by the doctor, yeah, that means you are good to start doing things. You are able to do things. They didn't say that, oh, you're back to 100% of what you were before.
Or at least
And
hopefully they didn't.
right. Oh, exactly. Yeah. but a lot of people hear something like that and they're like, oh, I'm cleared, so that means I'm good. And again, like, yeah, if you really want to be good again, quote unquote, like you want your body to function the way it was in the way that it can, this is where that road really almost begins, because now you can do all the work necessary to get your body back to where it was pre-injury. And again, this is assuming that that's most people's goal, is to get there, but a lot of people don't realize that that's what's happening. It's almost like, the old school martial arts adage, like once you're a black belt, the learning really starts. Like
Yeah,
it's the
that's
same idea.
not a bad comparison. Because
Um,
that back injury of mine was 16 months ago now, 17 months ago now, and I am still working to get back up to the strength I was at when it occurred. Although, to be fair, I am going really slowly because my new commitment is never having nerve pain ever again. Uh, but I mean, we're still ramping up because I didn't want to just try and get back there in 2 months and hurt myself again.
I'm working with a new ACL reconstruction right now, and she just started at the gym, but she had just reached the point where she's cleared by her physical therapist. I mean, they've done everything that they were supposed to. They said the injury happened, they got it looked at. After just a couple of weeks, again, like it didn't seem to be getting any better, so they went and got it looked at pretty soon after they realized that. They went in and had the surgery. As soon as they were told to, they had their steps from their surgeon, went and got physical therapy, and hit the point where, again, physical therapy wise, they're cleared. There's not much more the physical therapist can do. Again, if they want to really do what they like, get their leg back to function 100%, it's like, okay, now the time to really train and focus on it happens. And this is a young athlete, so she really wants to be able to go out there and give it her all and keep playing. Pretty good set, which makes it unfortunate that injuries happen. Looking over and technical difficulties. We're good. We're good again.
I don't know if Jerry's audio just fell apart on me or the broadcast as a whole, but he's been having internet trouble, so hopefully he'll be back here in just a second and
Yeah.
we can hear the rest of that story. He has some internet trouble out his way.
Am I back now?
Your audio is kind of sort of back. Your video is not, but I at least heard you ask if you're back now.
Okay. So, yeah. I see I come in now. So yeah, sorry first if you at all.
Well, tell you what, while we wait on his audio to come back, uh, there's a good second aspect of this to talk about, which is the mental part of injury recovery, because a lot of folks get depressed or anxious or otherwise have a lot of negativity around the recovery portion, either because they're not playing their sport fully, like if you were a starter in basketball, but you've got to only do a few plays here and there, or you're a championship weightlifter, but you've got to bring it up slowly. A lot of people either get depressed during the first portion where they've got to rest immediately, or they have trouble having the patience for the recovery. So that's worth talking about for a second. I see your video is back. Is your audio back yet?
Is it? Can you hear me?
There we go. Okay,
All
yeah,
right.
you're all the way back now. Sorry,
That's good.
I went on to another part because I couldn't finish your ACL story for you because it was the first time I was hearing it.
No, yeah, I could hear you the whole time, so we're good.
Oh, okay,
So,
word. Um,
good.
but we'll circle back to that in a second then. What's your thoughts on the mental side, like the depression that comes with either having to sit out a little bit as an athlete or just the patience to recover slowly? Like, what are some of the patterns you see people struggle with?
It's pretty big. Yeah, the mental side of injury is pretty big. Particularly now, part of it depends on the demographic, or like the type of person you are. Like I do see if um, like if you're not an athlete or don't have a particularly um like physical hobby that's really meaningful to you, and you got your injury, however that is, it tends to be more of a like I find those people actually struggle with it more from the action setup. Like they don't take a lot of action to it necessarily. Um, because it almost makes they seem to be almost more depressed when I see that. Because it's just simply a quality of like they had their quality of life and it's no longer what they wanted it to be anymore. And it tends to be a more like not conservative, but a slower approach on their end after that.
Mm.
With athletes or people who have physical hobbies, they have more of like an immediate depressive state. But I see most of them, start wanting to rehab and things like that soon. Like they're a little bit more proactive in wanting to figure out how to fix it. Um,
Well, that makes kind of a lot of sense because an athlete will maybe recognize a little easier that this is part of the process. If you're a non-physical person and have non-physical hobbies, well, active recovery is not generally part of your process. So that kind of makes sense in a way, I suppose.
right. And now I do see a pretty, regardless of the demographic, I do see a pretty big difference based on injuries that have a pretty cut and dry recovery pattern versus those that are more questionable. Like like what you would have been through with the nerve pain, or like my worst one was a herniated disc. So also nerve pain. And
And my IT band syndrome before that, because that was 2 years of throwing stuff at the
exactly.
wall to see what sticks.
Yeah, so what I mean by cut and dry is like a knee injury, like an ACL, a shoulder injury, like a rotator cuff that's pretty common, um, a really bad ankle. I mean, like something like that, like things that have a pretty standard. This is what happened. This is what we need to do next to fix it. These are the steps we will take, and this is approximately how many weeks or months we expect this to take. That that for almost everybody across the board is easier to understand and absorb, and then go ahead and start the process to dealing with it than something that is more blanket and maybe possibly has an unexplained mechanism, like with discs or like back injuries or nerve injuries. There might be an exact moment that you feel like it happened, but a lot of times there isn't. Um, like you say, it can be like a lift in the gym gone bad, or like, and you might know all of a sudden when it did it, but it also could be something that just creeps up very slowly over time. You don't notice it, and yeah, like it could have actually happened when like that stiff neck you had while sleeping was actually a nerve, was actually like a disc injury in your neck that you didn't think about for weeks because you're like, oh, I have a stiff neck. Um, for mine, for mine was a herniated disc, yeah, in my neck, and it started as just like it felt like I had pulled a small tiny muscle like inside of my shoulder blade, and I would get that feeling pretty often actually, but it would go away for in, 5 minutes to maybe 15, 20 minutes. This when it actually was my neck, it lasted for 3 weeks and got bigger.
Mm.
So I was like, okay, like I think there's actually something different, something bigger and wrong here. And by that point in time, damage had actually happened.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, and it's rare that I get to say this because when it comes to the negative emotions that come with like having to sit through an injury and work with it, most times different flavors of depression really have maybe different action steps. You really have to individualize it when it's injury related, and that's the thing that's causing a lot of the problem. It's very nice to actually be able to say, well, actually, here's the prescription that fits 80, 90% of people.
Mhm.
And they just need to hear almost an outside voice say it is, don't let the negative emotion turn into inaction. Because
Mhm.
here's a good story. Here's how this will develop into inaction. Uh, there's been half a dozen clients I've worked with, I'm sure at this point, that will have some sort of physical difficulty. Either they're actual athletes, or they're hobbyist athletes, or they're just folks who aren't very physical but get the injury. they'll and the second two categories are most vulnerable to this. They'll do some work, and just stuff's not getting better. And after a certain period of time, if it's not getting better, what a lot of people will do, they'll succumb to that depressed mindset that tells them, the whispers in their ear, well, you know what, this is just the way it is, give up on it. When, there's still probably a ton of action steps to take. I mean, how many of us have been with like a crappy medical provider and needed to switch? If
Mhm.
somebody's got an injury related thing that's not getting better, like, okay, maybe it really just does take this long, but maybe that's a signal to check with another provider, get a second opinion, and see, because this particular idea doesn't work for every single thing, but it works for an awful lot of medical providers. I firmly believe that if you are not getting better and you ask your medical provider, why am I not getting better? And they cannot provide a clear and detailed
Yes.
explanation as to why that is, then there's a strong chance you could be with the wrong provider. And it's worth at least getting a second or third opinion, because maybe this is just not their area. Maybe there's stuff going on they don't understand. If they can provide a clear and well thought out explanation for why this is not getting better, well, then probably the next thing they'll be able to provide is, okay, here's how we fix it.
Mhm.
But a lot of people get stuck at step one. They're like, well, okay, he can't fix it, so this is just the way it is. Instead of committing to continuing action, because sometimes you got to get different treatments from different people. I went to two different PTs for my IT band syndrome. One of them got me like 70-80% of the way, but then progress stopped. And then I went to the next one, and he was like, "Oh yeah, they did fine. They just forgot this, this, and this." And I was like, "Cool, okay." Well, and now I'm like 98% back instead of
Mhm.
70. So, but the risk is that that depressed state will lead to inaction, and the advice is try very hard not to let it lead to inaction.
Yes. Yeah, and that's huge. And you do see that a lot with that kinda goes with the, athlete versus non-athlete, or like you said, hobbyist versus not active
Eh,
person.
Yeah, like pro athletes are so insensitive to energy, effort, and money spent to fix it that
Mm.
they'll already do that. But
But
hobbyist
yeah,
athletes are a little more vulnerable to that.
right, and like you said, like, that is where I see most people who are not athletes fall prey to, is that inaction. Like I said, like, they'll go and get it treated a little bit, but as soon as it kinda becomes not, just a little bit more inconvenient or something, or like you said, they just don't see the results very quickly, they're much more likely to just accept it as a new reality. Like, "Oh, well, okay, this is just the way this is gonna feel now." It's like, no, like, again, like, there's something about the when we become apathetic to the way we feel as pain or discomfort, when we actually experience relief from it, it can be almost like mind blowing. It's such an like lighter feeling of like, oh, like wow, this is what it feels like to not feel like painful or uncomfortable or something like this. This is what it feels like to have full motion in my shoulder again. This is what it feels like to not have low back pain. I said, like, it's very easy to just get used to that through inactive through, just deciding not to take action. But when you actually feel the
And
results.
what's funny is, like, as you're saying that, like, uh that emotion even came up inside of me. Like, I had the urge to, like, oh, that's right, I can, like, my knees bend now, I can go and jump around. Like, I almost kind of wanted to get up and move around just to like feel it again.
Yeah, yeah, like, it's crazy how much better it feels. Like I said, like, our brain is really good, like you said, like, adaptive. It's also really good at fooling us into being like, "Oh, like, you're okay, like, that's fine, just you'll deal with it." But when you actually feel better, it's crazy, like, when you realize how much better you could have felt. It's like, "Oh, wow." So that alone would be my biggest reason to tell people, "Hey, go find out what's bugging you. If it's an injury you can tackle, like, take the steps to make it happen."
Hmm.
And like you said, even if it's 70%, that's still better than 0, but then if you please like try to give it that little bit of work to find out, see if somebody can help you get from 70 to 98 or 100.
You know, the more I've worked with people and the ones who deploy this advice, who like keep working on it, I have not met too many people who have injuries that can't get like 95 or more percent better.
Mhm.
Uh, I mean, there's one or two that are like just so absurdly bad that like, that they apparently just can't. But most of them seem to really be able to get back to almost the way they were. However, the trouble people run into is it just gets expensive in both monetary or in the time and energy involved. That's the part where people struggle the most. But I deeply encourage everybody to remember you live in this meat suit 24 hours a day.
Mhm.
It may as well be as pleasant an experience as it possibly can.
It really can be, and they said the monetary part can be real, but if you're gonna get it taken care of ever, it will be cheaper now than it ever will be in the future. Like, just like
Yes,
you said
that
early in the
part is for
podcast.
sure.
Yeah, like you said early in this, like, waiting for it to get worse is just gonna make it much longer and could lead to those other injuries, which, like I said, that just, like, increases the bill too. It's like so all right, brother. Said sorry about those technical difficulties again on the earlier part, which definitely threw a little bit of a wrench in
That's all right. I think we navigated it fine. The internets will do what it does sometimes.
there. That is right. So again, so in a nutshell, like, so whenever you have an injury that isn't going away just through like a little tender, gentle care early on, please get it checked out. Find out how you can make it better. Like again, trust professionals on this. Like JP said, sometimes you don't have the right provider. And so, I mean, specialists like this is where specialists really shine as well, to really help you to be able to find the solutions you need. And ideally, it's one like JP said, one they should be able to at least tell you what is going on, or they should also be able to think like they should be honest in whether or not they believe you can be quote unquote healed, recovered, fixed, whatever the word is. If it tends to be more of a just treat the symptom, mask the symptom, it might help in the short term, but that's also a good reason to try to find somebody else. Because I said most of what we have in terms of injuries can be fixed, or they're not vastly improved. Like just simply treating the symptom should be the last option.
Yep,
So,
agreed.
so, all right, but anything else you want to add?
No, I think the habit here is just don't let it go and keep working on it. Which is it sounds like trite advice, but I hope we made a good case for why it's so important to do that.
Yeah. So feeling better always feels better. People just need to actually remember that.
Yes.
It's like, so, all right, brother. I'll catch you later. See you, everybody.
All right. Thanks. Thanks, y'all.